I love science. It's true. But sometimes it feels like science can't help us writers. We're creating art. You know, we're creating characters and plots and worlds for a reader to connect with. What, you think science can just say take 1 part character development and 2 parts plot and wham, you have a good scene? That's ridiculous. Or is it? Okay, I'm gonna do it. Now, I don't know exactly what's gonna happen here. It could be crazy. Okay, 1, 2, 3. I love a good scientific journal or a trade journal or any sort of peer-reviewed, thoughtful, interesting study on things. It's my bread and butter. But narrative writing fiction, that feels very different from the kind of material you find in there. So naturally, I had this question of what research has been done in the areas of narrative fiction? And the stuff that I found was amazing. People are interested in stories. All kinds of people, right? Telling and experiencing stories is just a human thing. We've done it as people for as long as we could. And because of that, we want to understand it. Today, I'm gonna show you 3 incredible ways to improve your writing based on science. This comes from academic journals like Current Directions in Psychological Science, or in other journals like Cognitive Psychology. Researchers want to know how and why people love stories, and hey, so do we, right? Let's start by talking about event segmentation. In the paper Event Segmentation by authors Zaks and Swallow, we attempt to understand why people break down complex linear events into smaller parts. And we see this all over the place, right? A football game is broken down into plays and drives. Building Legos is broken down into steps and sections, and stories are broken down into scenes, sequences, and acts. Now, relevant to us is the understanding of what makes a scene in a story memorable and valuable to the reader. But you know what, first, what even is a scene? A scene is a basic building block of a narrative story, and scenes are organized into sequences. And sequences are multiple scenes that start and complete a narrative thread, okay? Right? Think about the opening of Indiana Jones exploring that cave in the jungle. We get a bunch of scenes of Indiana overcoming traps, stealing a golden idol, being chased by a giant boulder, being betrayed by his accomplice, losing the idol, and finally Indiana Jones flying away in a biplane. A series of scenes in one long sequence. And then the next scene is the beginning of a new sequence with Indiana teaching at the university. In their paper, Zaks and Swallow give 2 major points that we can apply to our own scenes so that readers understand and remember them more clearly. And first and foremost, a scene in your story should have a very clear boundary, a beginning and an end. Most of the time, we writers will accomplish that within a chapter. The start and the conclusion of a chapter defines that scene. In books with longer chapters, you may have multiple scenes divided by scene breaks. Now, that's how we break up a story in the medium of writing, but it's also important that your scenes narratively have a clear boundary. The clearer those boundaries, the better your reader internalizes the story. If you want to test this yourself, ask someone to tell you about the plot of their favorite book. The scenes and the sequences that they remember from that story will likely be the ones where major changes happen and the scenes have clear conclusions. Now, secondly, the scenes must be organized in a way that makes sense. But more on this when we talk about story grammar later. If we know how these scenes need to be defined, what exactly needs to happen in a scene? We know where it begins, where it ends, and why that's important. But what happens in those 2 areas? I went off script there. It wasn't very coherent. Let's talk about situation models. Zwan et al. Wrote about situation models focused on reader understanding and memory in their paper from 1995 called The Construction of Situation Models in Narrative Comprehension, and I love this paper. Here's the basic concept. When readers start reading a story, they create a model in their head of the state of the story. And in this model is the reader's understanding of these concepts, which will reduce down to this: time, setting, characters, cause, and goals. And let's call these the story elements. In their paper, Zwan et al. Find that it was the changing of these story elements that were most remembered by readers, which means that we as authors need to make sure that every scene in our story has purpose. And of course, you already knew that. But look, your scene, it should do something. Either it moves the story in time or setting, the character goes through change or conflict, we cause something or are affected by a past action, a goal is attempted, updated, completed, or even changed. These are the major state changes. And this part, this isn't in the paper, this is a Carson original, but a scene can impact multiple story elements at the same time and be even stronger, right? If all your scene does is change something like time and space, that isn't enough. A tight, efficient story engages the reader at every point. Previously, that's all I would have said, but now after reading this paper, I can clarify the statement in this way. Engaging a reader at every point means that your scenes must affect change in these story elements, and then all the story elements. So now we know what makes a good scene. It's the state changes of the narrative. And we know that our scenes need to have these clear boundaries, which brings us to our final concept called story grammar. Just like language has grammar, so does a story. Grammar within language is a standardized set of rules that helps us communicate in the same way. Because a writer needs to know how to write in a grammatically correct way, and a reader needs to be practiced at reading grammatically correct language so everything is as frictionless as possible. Mandler and Johnson, in their paper Remembrance of Things Parsed, Story Structure and Recall, explore the concept of grammar within story structure. There is a certain way that we need to organize the scenes to help readers connect with our story, to help them enjoy the experience, and ideally to help them remember our story more clearly, which is a good thing. And this grammar affects scenes in two main ways. First, the organization of events within the scene, right? We've talked previously about what needs to happen narratively. God, what is happening? To create strong scenes by changing these story elements. But this paper talks about organizing your scene to have a setting, initiating event, attempt, outcome, and reaction. Every scene should hit these marks. Okay? Now, look, you already know this. We've been primed to do this since you learned to write. And let me take you through these terms and modify them so that there's something you already know. Opening image, inciting incident, crisis, climax, resolution. Doesn't that look familiar? You'll find these terms in almost every plot framework. It's how we organize stories as a whole, but it's also how we can organize smaller parts of our stories. And eagle-eyed viewers of the channel will remember this video on breaking down the story grid by Sean Coyne, where he talks about story recursiveness, a concept that I've taken to heart. And just like a story needs organizational elements, so do our individual acts and sequences and scenes. A perfect story will be recursive by having these elements at every scale. The story grammar concept goes further, also talking about how the scenes you write must transition together. Scenes must be connected through and, then, or cause. What does that mean? Well, it says you should be able to connect every scene in your story through these words. And if you can't, then you have a scene that is disconnected from the rest of your story. And this finally gives us something actionable that we can take away into the planning of our story. Create scenes that are connected, right? Organize events based on these connections and ensure that every scene follows the story grammar. This happens, and then this happens, and this causes this to happen, right? Everything is linked. What are your thoughts on these concepts? Have you ever heard any of these concepts before, and where? Do you agree or disagree? Because this is all new to me and I would love to hear what you think. Comment down below, come join us over in the Discord, of course, and subscribe for more studies and how to make our writing even stronger. And as always, thank you for watching.